I am staring at a glossy photograph on my phone screen right now. A picture of my parents looking completely and utterly defeated. They are sitting at their old oak dining table. The same table where they used to count their money and complain about how much I cost them as a child. But now, that table is entirely covered in bright red final notice letters, aggressive bank statements, and the shattered remains of their broken promises. My sister Lily sent this photo to me at 2 in the morning, accompanied by 7 frantic, tearful voicemails, begging me to answer the phone, begging me to save them from the financial ruin they created for themselves. And for the very first time in my 34 years of life, I look at their misery, I listen to my sister sobbing into the receiver, and I feel absolutely nothing. They always say family is everything. They constantly preach that blood is thicker than water, and that you must always forgive your flesh and blood. But what happens when you finally realize your blood only loves you for your bank account? What happens when you discover that the people who brought you into this world view you as nothing more than a highly functioning, breathing ATM machine? It took a massive $9 million lie to unmask the absolute monsters I blindly called my family. And the brutal, agonizing truth almost destroyed my sanity before it finally set me free. My name is Doris. To truly understand why I am sitting in my beautiful, quiet living room today, completely ignoring my sister's desperate pleas for a financial rescue, you have to understand exactly what happened 3 years ago. You have to understand the exact moment my soul was crushed, right before I had to rebuild it from the ashes. It all started on a rainy Tuesday morning, the exact day I officially sold my tech startup for $9.3 million. On paper, to the outside world, it should have been the greatest, most triumphant moment of my entire existence. I had sacrificed absolutely everything for that software company. I spent 6 long, grueling years working 18-hour days, surviving on cheap black coffee and stale bagels, sleeping on a terrible lumpy mattress on my freezing office floor. I destroyed my physical health, I missed every single holiday, I lost touch with my friends, and I pushed my body to the absolute brink of total collapse just to build something valuable from absolutely nothing. But when the official news of the massive corporate sale finally broke and the staggering amount of money actually hit my bank account, I did not open champagne. I did not jump up and down. Instead, a cold, sickening, terrifying dread settled heavily over my chest, making it hard to breathe. I knew exactly what was coming. In my toxic family, my personal celebration always inevitably turned into their massive expectation. People often ask me a very logical question. They ask why I didn't just hide the money. Why tell them anything at all if I already knew deep down that they were greedy and manipulative? The truth is so much more pathetic and deeply rooted in childhood trauma. When you grow up in a deeply toxic household where your fundamental value is constantly minimized, where you are always considered second best to a golden child sister, your success becomes your desperate, glowing weapon for attention. Deep down in my soul, despite being a wealthy, powerful CEO who commanded boardrooms, I was still just a desperate, incredibly insecure 10-year-old child. I was still that little girl running home with an A+ test score, holding up my cheap little trophies, begging my parents to just look at me and finally be proud of me. I foolishly, naively thought this massive, undeniable $9 million number would finally change how they saw me. I thought they would finally look at me with awe and say that they loved me for me. But I was so incredibly wrong. To opportunistic, selfish people, your massive achievements are never a source of genuine pride. They do not look at your success and feel joy. They look at your success and see a communal asset waiting to be completely drained. Within mere days of the sale hitting the public news, the subtle, highly manipulative hints began to drop. My sister Lily called me, not to congratulate me on my decade of hard work, but to casually, loudly complain about her children's insanely expensive private school tuition being due next week. She sighed into the phone, talking about how stressed her husband was, waiting for me to volunteer my wallet. 2 days later, my parents suddenly mentioned urgent, massive home repairs. The roof was allegedly leaking, the foundation was allegedly cracking, and they conveniently could not afford the contractor. It is a vicious psychological trap known by therapists as financial enmeshment. In a normal, healthy family, boundaries exist. Your money is your money. But in my family, the boundaries were completely erased decades ago. My money was automatically treated as their personal, unlimited emergency fund. They never actually asked if I could help, They never said please. They simply stated their expensive problems out loud and waited patiently for my intense guilt to open my checkbook. And if I hesitated for even a single second, if I dared to say I needed time to look at my own finances, the massive suffocating guilt trips would start immediately. My mother would start crying about her blood pressure. My father would loudly remind me of how family sacrifices for each other, twisting my totally normal boundaries into an accusation of extreme, unforgivable selfishness. I was so emotionally exhausted I could barely get out of bed. My husband Tom noticed my rapidly spiraling anxiety. Tom is an incredibly quiet, highly observant man, but he sees absolutely everything. He grew up in a normal, loving home where people actually hugged each other when they were sad, instead of just paying each other's credit card bills to show affection. He watched my family bleed my accounts dry for 6 long years. He watched every boundary I ever tried to set be violently crushed by their expert emotional manipulation. One evening, as I was sitting at the kitchen island, literally hyperventilating over another massive, $5,000 invoice my father had just blindly forwarded to my email without a single word of explanation, Tom walked over. He gently closed my laptop, sat down next to me, looked me dead in the eye and said, "Call them right now, Doris. Call them and tell them the corporate deal completely collapsed. Tell them you are buried in hidden debt, and you lost absolutely everything." I laughed nervously, wiping tears from my eyes, thinking it was a dark, twisted joke to make me feel better. But his face was dead serious. His eyes were locked onto mine, completely unblinking. He knew I was deeply trapped in a never-ending cycle of severe emotional manipulation. He knew I was addicted to the false sense of peace I bought by writing them checks. And he wanted me to finally see the rotten, completely decayed core of the love I was constantly trying to buy. It was a terrifying, gut-wrenching test. I felt physically sick at the thought of lying to them. But my soul was tired, and I was desperate enough to finally try it. That exact night, I picked up my phone and called my sister Lily. My hands were physically shaking holding the receiver. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. When she finally answered, her voice was practically vibrating with intense, greedy excitement. She was fully expecting a massive financial handout from her newly rich millionaire sister. She even started the call by asking what kind of car I thought she should buy. I took a deep, trembling breath. I forced tears into my eyes, and I told her the lie. I told her that massive, undisclosed corporate hidden debts, brutal federal taxes, and sudden legal penalties had completely wiped out the entire sale. I forced my voice to crack perfectly, and I told her I was completely broke, that my lawyers were taking everything, and that Tom and I might actually lose our house by the end of the month. The silence on the other end of the line was completely deafening. It was a heavy, terrifying silence. I could literally hear the gears turning in her head as she aggressively calculated her own personal losses. I waited for the empathy. I waited for my big sister to tell me it was going to be okay, and that I could stay in her guest room. And then, the sweet sister mask violently slipped off. She didn't ask if I was okay. She didn't ask how I was going to survive, or if I had food in the fridge. She immediately, instinctively started aggressively complaining about her own problems. "Are you kidding me, Doris? Are you actually serious right now?" she snapped, her voice suddenly high-pitched and furious. "What about the kids' private school tuition? What about my kitchen renovations? I already told the contractors to order the imported marble because I knew your bonus was coming. Your timing is absolutely terrible. How could you be so incredibly stupid to lose all that money? People were relying on you." She didn't offer a single word of comfort. The conversation ended abruptly with her hanging up on me in pure, unadulterated disgust. I sat there on my bed, staring at the blank phone screen, feeling my heart shatter into a million pieces. Tom just held me while I cried. The next morning, with my eyes swollen from crying, and Tom tightly holding my shaking hand, I called my parents. I repeated the exact same devastating, soul-crushing lie. For exactly 1 minute. My mother played the role of a concerned parent. She asked if I was physically safe. She made a small, sympathetic noise in her throat. But the absolute second the reality of the $9 million disappearing completely set in, my father violently ripped the phone away from her. "What do you mean the money is gone?" he roared into the receiver, his voice echoing in my quiet kitchen. He didn't offer me a place to stay. He didn't offer a small loan to help me buy groceries. He didn't offer a single word of fatherly comfort. Instead, he aggressively demanded to know how I was going to pay the massive property taxes I had allegedly promised to cover for his vacation cabin. He screamed into the phone that my financial success was supposed to open doors for the entire family, that I was supposed to elevate their social status, and now I was completely embarrassing them in front of all their country club friends because they had already bragged loudly about my wealth. I softly asked him why he was making massive financial promises to his friends using money that did not belong to him. He exploded. He called me utterly useless, incredibly selfish, and deeply irresponsible. He yelled that I couldn't just drop this massive, unfair burden on them when they were trying to enjoy their retirement. Not once, not a single time during that horrific, traumatizing 20-minute call, did either of my parents ask how I was doing mentally or physically. They didn't care if my marriage was surviving the stress. They didn't care if I was suicidal. I realized right then with absolute soul-crushing, undeniable clarity, I was never a beloved daughter to them. I was never a human being with feelings. I was just a highly functioning, breathing ATM machine. And the moment I printed a receipt saying insufficient funds, I became entirely worthless to them. 2 days later, the agonizing grief I felt completely evaporated, and it turned into pure, burning, righteous anger. I called them and demanded they all come to my house for a mandatory family meeting. Before they arrived, I locked myself in my home office and logged into every single banking portal I had. I printed out 6 full years of exhaustive, highly detailed financial records. I printed every single wire transfer, every paid medical bill, every luxury family vacation I had blindly funded, every emergency bailout I had ever provided for Lily's irresponsible husband. The stack of papers was unbelievably thick. It was hundreds of pages of my own sweat and blood, transformed into a physical monument of their endless greed. When they finally arrived at my front door, the atmosphere was instantly toxic. My mother walked in playing the fragile, weeping victim, clutching a tissue to her chest. My father looked incredibly impatient, angry, and deeply inconvenienced. And Lily just marched in, sat on my expensive sofa with her arms crossed, and glared at me with absolute hatred. We sat in the living room, the tension so thick you could cut it with a knife. I looked at them, my voice completely devoid of emotion, and asked them point-blank what they expected from me now that I had supposedly lost my entire life's work. My mother cried fake tears and talked about her unpaid medical bills, saying she didn't know how she would afford her brand-name medications. My father sternly, coldly said we had to be highly practical about their upcoming retirement, and that I needed to figure out a way to take out a personal loan to cover their property taxes. And my sister, my own flesh and blood, coldly, ruthlessly stated that I still had a strong earning power, a good resume, and that I needed to find a new high-paying corporate job immediately so I could keep contributing to her children's future college fund. I sat there, staring at the 3 of them. I asked a very simple question. I asked if any of them, even for a single fleeting second, had considered pooling their resources to help me. Lily looked at me like I was speaking a completely alien language. My father scoffed, rolling his eyes as if I had just asked him to jump off a bridge. That is the exact beautiful moment I slammed the massive, heavy folders of financial records right onto the glass coffee table. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the room. My father jumped back. He reached forward, opened the first thick folder, and his face went completely terrifyingly pale as he stared at the brightly highlighted numbers. He was looking at thousands of dollars in transfers. Lily's face instantly twisted into sheer, aggressive rage, realizing what I had done. She started screaming at the absolute top of her lungs that I was a psychopath. She yelled that I was viciously weaponizing my past help against them, that I was keeping a secret ledger like a sociopath. My father jumped up from his chair, his face red with fury, yelling that real families do not keep score. He shouted that my records were cold, calculating, deeply transactional, and highly disrespectful to my elders. That is when Tom finally spoke up. My quiet, patient husband had heard enough. His voice was like a crack of terrifying thunder in the chaotic room. "Family helps family, right?" Tom yelled, stepping right up to my father. "Is that your favorite excuse? Then where exactly were you people when Doris was working herself to the bone in a freezing office for 6 years? Where were you when she was hospitalized for severe exhaustion and dehydration 3 years ago? You didn't visit her once. You constantly used the word family as a pair of heavy emotional handcuffs to force her into paying your way. But you conveniently magically vanish into thin air the absolute second she actually needs you to step up. They were stunned. They tried to use blood as a sacred, untouchable shield for their completely toxic behavior, screaming that outsiders like Tom could not define our family dynamics. My sister started violently sobbing, pointing a shaking finger at me, accusing me of choosing a man over my own flesh and blood, trying to use the ultimate guilt trip. I looked right at her fake manipulative tears. I looked at my furious father. And I looked at my mother who was hiding behind her hands. And then, I dropped the ultimate nuclear bomb. I stood up, my posture perfectly straight, my voice completely steady, and I said, the sale was real. The corporate deal went through perfectly without a single problem. The $9.3 million is sitting completely safe in my bank account, right this very second. The absolute shock on their faces was priceless. It was a masterpiece. Their jaws physically dropped, their eyes widened to the size of saucers. For a fraction of a second, I saw intense, incredible relief wash over Lily's face. She thought she was rich again. But the relief didn't last a single second, because it was followed instantly by pure, unadulterated, vicious outrage when their brains finally caught up, and they realized they had completely failed the test. They realized they had just shown me their true, hideous colors. They started screaming simultaneously. It was absolute chaos. My father pointed at me, calling me a sick, highly manipulative sociopath for testing them. My mother wailed at the top of her lungs that I had gone entirely too far, clutching her chest and claiming I was giving her a physical heart attack. And Lily demanded to know how I could be so incredibly cruel and unusual to my own niece and nephew by playing with their financial security. They went into a complete, desperate, flailing panic to regain control. My mother faked a severe health scare, breathing heavily and demanding a glass of water. My father tried to aggressively assert his old, booming patriarchal authority, pointing at the floor and ordering me to apologize immediately and write them a massive check for the emotional distress I caused. And Lily desperately tried to use her children as the ultimate emotional leverage, crying that her kids would be homeless because of my sick game. But I stood there like a solid wall of ice. I was completely beautifully done. The fear of being hated by your own family is deeply, terrifyingly paralyzing. It keeps you trapped in a cage of your own making. But enduring their hate, standing firm while they scream at you, is the ultimate, necessary test of self-respect. You are absolutely not born into this world to be a permanent life raft for lazy, entitled people who intentionally drill massive holes in their own boats. I looked at them with a terrifying calmness that seemed to scare them more than if I had yelled. I told them that I had spent my entire adult life deeply confusing toxic manufactured guilt with genuine family loyalty, and that the confusion ended today. I looked my father in the eye and told him there would be no more automatic financial rescues. I looked at Lily and told her there would be no more monthly tuition checks. I told them there would be no more emotional blackmail, no more screaming matches, and absolutely no more of my money funding their extravagant, fake lifestyles. Tom walked over, opened the front door wide, and we stood there in complete silence. They realized the ATM was permanently closed. They stormed out of my house in a massive whirlwind of wounded pride, screaming horrific curses at me from my own driveway, promising that I would die completely alone. Over the next week, I systematically, surgically cut off every single financial tie I had to them. I logged into the bank and canceled all the standing auto transfers. I called my lawyers and legally removed myself from their shared property obligations and loans. I sat down with my estate planner and updated all my documents to ensure that if I died tomorrow, they would never see a single penny of my hard-earned wealth. Predictably, the massive coordinated family backlash came hard and fast. I received dozens of hateful texts from extended aunts and uncles who only heard my parents' twisted version of the story. I was called corrupted by new money, manipulated and brainwashed by my evil husband, and totally dead to the family. But you know what? For the very first time in my entire life, I truly deeply did not care. The silence in my phone was not a punishment. It was the most beautiful music I had ever heard. I started using my massive wealth to create real impactful independence. I joined a powerful network for women founders. I started actively mentoring young, struggling female entrepreneurs who were sleeping on their office floors just like I used to. I funded massive college scholarships for kids who actually needed the money and who actually appreciated the help. And most importantly, I finally booked a quiet, luxurious month-long vacation to Italy with my husband. We drank wine, we ate pasta, and we slept deeply, completely free from the constant, sickening terror of fake family emergencies interrupting our lives. Now, sitting here 3 years later, looking at this pathetic, desperate photograph Lily just sent me, looking at the mountain of debt my parents accumulated because they refused to stop spending money they didn't have, I am faced with a choice. She wants me to come home. She wants me to fix it. She says they are sorry, but it is the easiest choice I have ever made in my entire life. I am no longer the terrified, insecure little daughter who pays massive ransoms just to keep the peace. I am no longer the desperate sister who mistakes absolute financial sacrifice for genuine human connection. I learned the hardest, most brutal, and most valuable lesson of all. Being needed for your utility is absolutely not the same thing as being loved for your humanity. I will not meet them. I will not reply to the voicemails. I will simply delete the photo. I am finally, completely, and unapologetically free. Disclaimer. This video is created for the sole purpose of entertainment. All situations, characters, and stories in this video are fictional and are built entirely using artificial intelligence technology. We hope you have a relaxing time.